Hello, my little Luxes. Welcome back to another Scary Stories My Father Told Me. And I am your host, charsielux. And yes, today we are continuing on with our Irish fairy tales. So, the story that I am telling today is a very old story, and it is The Lady of Gollerus. And it's an Irish folktale that tells of a man who finds a mermaid and makes her his wife. And this story was originally published in 1828. So please come gather around the campfire with me as I share this old Irish fairy tale. The Lady of Gollerus. On the shore of Shumrick Harbor, one fine summer's morning, just at daybreak, stood Dick Fitzgerald, smoking his pipe. The sun was gradually rising behind the lofty Brandon. The dark sea was getting green in the light, and the mist clearing away out of the valley went rolling and curling like the smoke from the corner of Dick's mouth. "'Tis just the pattern of a pretty morning," said Dick, taking the pipe from between his lips, and looking towards the distant ocean, which lay as still and tranquil as a tomb of polished marble. "Well, to be sure," continued he, after a pause, "'tis mighty lonesome to be talking to oneself by way of company, and not to have another soul to answer one, nothing but the child of one's own voice, the echo. I know this, that if I had the luck, or may be the misfortune," said Dick, with a melancholy smile, "to have the woman, it would not be this way with me. And what in the wide world is a man without a wife? He's no more surely than a bottle without a drop of drink in it, or dancing without music, or the left leg of a scissors, or a fishing line without a hook, or any other matter that is no ways complete. Is it not so?" said Dick, casting his eyes towards a rock upon the strand, which, though it could not speak, stood up as firm and looked as bold as ever Carrie Witness did. But what was his astonishment at beholding, just at the foot of that rock, a beautiful young creature combing her hair, which was of sea-green color, and now the salt water shining on it appeared, in the morning light, like melted butter upon cabbage. Dick guessed at once that she was a mermaid, although he had never seen one before, for he spied the little enchanted cap which the sea people use for diving down into the water, lying upon the strand near her, and he had heard that, if once he could possess himself of the cap, she would lose the power of going away into the water. So he seized it with all speed, and she, hearing the noise, turned her head about as natural as any Christian. When the mermaid saw that her little diving cap was gone, the salt tears, doubly salt, no doubt for her, came trickling down her cheeks, and she began a little mournful cry with just the tender voice of a newborn infant. Dick, although he knew well enough what she was crying for, determined to keep the cap. Let her cry never so much, to see what luck would come out of it. Yet he could not help pitying her, and when the dumb thing looked up in his face, with her cheeks all moist with tears, 'twas enough to make anyone feel, let alone Dick, who had ever and always, like most of his countrymen, a mighty tender heart of his own. "Don't cry, my darling," said Dick, but the mermaid, like any bold child, only cried the more for that. Dick sat himself down by her side, and took hold of her hand by way of comforting her. 'Twas in no particular an ugly hand, only there was a small web between the fingers, as there is in a duck's foot, but 'twas as thin and as white as the skin between egg and shell. "What's your name, my darling?" said Dick, thinking to make her conversate with him, but he got no answer, and he was certain sure now either that she could not speak or did not understand him. He therefore squeezed her hand in his, as the only way he had of talking to her. It's the universal language, and there's not a woman in the world, be she fish or lady, that does not understand it. The mermaid did not seem much displeased at this mode of conversation, and making an end of her whining all at once. "Man," says she, looking up at Dick, "man, will you eat me?" "By all the red petticoats and check aprons between Dingle and Tralee," cried Dick, jumping up in amazement, "I'd as soon eat myself, my jewel. Is it I eat you, my pet? Now, 'twas some ugly, ill-looking thief of a fish put that notion into your own pretty head, with the nice green hair down upon it, that is so cleanly combed out this morning." "Man," said the mermaid, "what will you do with me if you won't eat me?" Dick's thoughts were running on a wife. He saw, at the first glimpse, that she was handsome, but since she spoke, and spoke too like any real woman, he was fairly in love with her. 'Twas the neat way she called him man that settled the matter entirely. "Fish," says Dick, trying to speak to her after her own short fashion. "Fish," says he, "here's my word, fresh and fasting, for you this blessed morning, that I'll make you Mistress Fitzgerald before all the world, and that's what I'll do." "Never say the word twice," says she. "I'm ready and willing to be yours, Mr. Fitzgerald, but stop, if you please, till I twist up my hair." It was some time before she had settled it entirely to her liking, for she guessed, I suppose, that she was going among strangers where she would be looked at. When that was done, the mermaid put the comb in her pocket, and then bent down her head and whispered some words to the water that was close to the foot of the rock. Dick saw the murmur of the words upon the top of the sea, going out towards the wide ocean, just like a breath of wind rippling along, and says he, in the greatest wonder, "Is it speaking you are, my darling, to the salt water?" "It's nothing else," says she, quite carelessly. "I'm just sending word home to my father not to be waiting breakfast for me, just to keep him from being uneasy in his mind." "And who's your father, my duck?" said Dick. "What?" said the mermaid. "Did you never hear of my father? He's the king of the waves, to be sure." "And yourself, then, is a real king's daughter?" said Dick, opening his two eyes to take a full and true survey of his wife that was to be. "Oh, I'm nothing else but a made man with you, and a king your father. To be sure, he has all the money that's down at the bottom of the sea." "Money?" repeated the mermaid. "What's money?" "'Tis no bad thing to have when one wants it," replied Dick. "And maybe now the fishes have the understanding to bring up whatever you bid them." "Oh, yes," said the mermaid, "they bring me what I want." "To speak the truth, then," said Dick, "'tis a straw bed I have at home before you, and that, I'm thinking, is no ways fitting for a king's daughter. So if 'twould not be displeasing to you, just to mention a nice feather bed with a pair of new blankets. But what am I talking about? Maybe you have no such things as beds down under the water." "By all means," said she, "Mr. Fitzgerald, plenty of beds at your service. I've 14 oyster beds of my own, not to mention one just planting for the rearing of young ones." "You have?" says Dick, scratching his head and looking a little puzzled. "'Tis a feather bed I was speaking of, but clearly yours is the very cut of a decent plan, to have bed and supper so handy to each other, that a person, when they'd have the one need, never ask for the other. However, bed or no bed, money or no money, Dick Fitzgerald determined to marry the mermaid, and the mermaid had given her consent. Away they went, therefore, across the strand, from Gollerus to Bellingrunnen, where Father Fitzgibbon happened to be that morning. "There are 2 words to this bargain, Dick Fitzgerald," said his reverence, looking mighty glum, "and it is a fishy woman you'd marry. The Lord preserve us, send the scaly creature home to her own people. That's my advice to you, wherever she came from." Dick had the magical cap in his hand, and was about to give it back to the mermaid, who looked longingly at it. But he thought for a moment, and then says he, "Please your reverence, she's a king's daughter." "If she was a daughter of 50 kings," said Father Fitzgibbon, "I tell you, you can't marry her, she being a fish." "Please your reverence," said Dick again, in an undertone, "she is as mild and as beautiful as the moon." "If she was as mild and as beautiful as the sun, moon, and stars all put together, I tell you, Dick," said the priest, stamping his right foot, "you can't marry her, she being a fish. But she has all the gold that's down in the sea, only for the asking, and I'm a made man if I marry her, and," said Dick, looking up slyly, "I can make it worth anyone's while to do the job." "Oh, that alters the case entirely," replied the priest. "Why, there's some reason now in what you say. Why didn't you tell me this before? Marry her by all means. If she was 10 times a fish, money, is not to be refused in these bad times, and I may as well have the hensel of it as another, that maybe would not take half the pains in counseling you that I have done. So Father Fitzgibbon married Dick and the mermaid, and like any loving couple, they returned to Gollerus well pleased with each other. Everything prospered with Dick. He was at the sunny side of the world, the mermaid made the best of wives, and they lived together in the greatest contentment. It was wonderful to see, considering where she had been brought up, how she would busy herself about the house, and how well she nursed the children, for at the end of 3 years, there were as many young Fitzgeralds, 2 boys and a girl. In short, Dick was a happy man, and so he might have been to the end of his days if he had only had the sense to take care of what he had got. Many another man, however, besides Dick, has not had wit enough to do that. One day, when Dick was obliged to go to Tralee, he left the wife minding the children at home after him, and thinking she had plenty to do without disturbing his fishing tackle. Dick was no sooner gone than Mrs. Fitzgerald set about cleaning up the house, and chancing to pull down a fishing net, what should she find behind it in a hole in the wall but her own enchanted cap? She took it out and looked at it, and then she thought of her father the king, and her mother the queen, and her brothers and sisters, and she felt a longing to go back to them. She sat down on a little stool and thought over the happy days she had spent under the sea. Then she looked at her children, and thought on the love and affection of poor Dick, and how it would break his heart to lose her. But, says she, he won't lose me entirely, for I'll come back to him again, and who can blame me for going to see my father and my mother after being so long away from them? She got up and went towards the door, but came back again to look once more at the child that was sleeping in the cradle. She kissed it gently, and as she kissed it, a tear trembled for an instant in her eye, and then fell on its rosy cheek. She wiped away the tear, and turning to the eldest little girl, told her to take good care of her brothers, and to be a good child herself until she came back. The mermaid then went down to the strand. The sea was lying calm and smooth, just heaving and glittering in the sun, and she thought she heard a faint, sweet singing, inviting her to come down. All her old ideas and feelings came flooding over her mind. Dick and her children were at the instant forgotten, and placing the cap on her head, she plunged in. Dick came home in the evening, and missing his wife, he asked Kathleen, his little girl, what had become of her mother, but she could not tell him. He then inquired of the neighbors, and he learned that she was seen going towards the strands with a strange-looking hat in her hand. He returned to his cabin in search of the cap. It was gone, and the truth now flashed upon him. Year after year did Dick Fitzgerald wait expecting the return of his wife, but he never saw her more. Dick never married again, always thinking that the mermaid would sooner or later return to him, and nothing could ever persuade him but that her father the king kept her below by main force. For, said Dick, she surely would not of herself give up her husband and her children. While she was with him, she was so good a wife in every respect that to this day she is spoken of, in the tradition of the country, as the pattern for one under the name of the Lady of Gollerus. Well, my little Luxes, I truly hope you enjoyed that mermaid tale, that little fishy tale. So, what did you think of this story? What did you think of this mermaid's tale? It's interesting that every culture has its own version of mermaid stories. Thank you so much for joining me again on another Scary Stories My Father Told Me. And remember, I am the afterlife of the party, but I would love for you to join me in the afterlife of the party. And on the screen, you can see a huge shout out to all of my fellow Patreon members. You are all a part of the afterlife of the party. And a Special shout out to my ultimate Luxes. So thank you so much to Chris Bruner, Bishop, and Joshua Sanchez. Thank you for being ultimate Luxes with me. And remember that just because you come across a beautiful mermaid does not give you the right to take away their magical powers and force them to do your bidding. Let the mermaids be free spirits to do as they wish. Until next time, bye.